All right, who needs a lesson from last week? Mark Cunningham? You'll get two. You'll get one that goes through 20, and then one that will go from 19 on. So the one, that one you have in your hand is last week's. The second one will be like 19. It just kind of backs up a little bit. What does that one say? Yeah, that's last week's. And then you get another one. It's kind of a part B. Had some good news today. Of course, Neil Limberg got to come home. Sadie Meyer got a test back, and it showed that her cancer is in remission. She is Rick Harmon's friend's daughter. Rose Carter is having eye surgery on Monday. Bob Ping is having knee replacement April the 1st. Is that a good day to go to the doctor? Good day to tell him you already paid the bill. Rodney Bailey is going in for knee surgery, don't know what sort, April the 12th. And Patrick, his wife went through having a baby and hernia, and she did not cry or hurt as much as Patrick. So Patrick is probably going to be out for the rest of the year recouping. His surgery went well. I almost took a picture of this and showed it next time I preach. His surgery, you got this, lasted 9 minutes. How can anyone cry with 9 minutes of surgery?
You would take the knockout drug for him.
Yeah, I would. You need a lesson, Kevin? Just grab one of each. I'll tell you what, just hold them back then if you see someone come in. All right. I think one of the best passages that we need is in chapter 1 and in verse 8 of the book of Lamentations. two statements that we need to bring out from number 8, chapter 1, verse 8. And here's Judah. The two tribes. Israel is already gone. The two tribes, Dan and Manasseh, make up Judah, had watched it and had not learned their lesson. There's always people who say, well, it'll happen to everyone else except me. We're on the first one, which will be Lamentations, dated 3:20 of 24. We're on the third page, just kind of recouping here a minute. But there's always people, and there's members of the church. Rather than a wise person learns not from their own mistakes, but from other people's. But there's always folks that are always going to say, it'll happen to everyone else but not me. And we never learn. And sometimes you just keep making the same mistake over and over and over. And so here was Judah's complaint. It wasn't that they were being punished. It was they just thought the punishment exceeded God's justice. In other words, yeah, we poked an eye out, but Lord, you've not poked one, you've poked three. When are you going to stop? And that was their complaint. 4 times up until the latter part, you hear this conclusion from Judah: there is no one to comfort me. And then the latter part, you'll hear the 5th and the final: there's no one to comfort me. Hey, Jorge, go online and make sure that everything's up and running. Bless your heart. Who knows how to do that? All right, Kevin. And so one thing we need to remember there in verse 8 is Jerusalem, Israel. Here it will be talking about all the tribes, but specifically written to Judah. Jerusalem sinned grievously. Therefore, why is Jerusalem referred to as a female? She was married to God. Ezekiel chapter 16. And we'll look further at this language. Now, unfortunately, there are passages and words that have been changed, mainly because they are so offensive. I once made that statement, and a preacher out of Birmingham texted me and said God would put nothing offensive in the Bible. I want you to notice something here. Therefore, she, Jerusalem, because she is the bride of Christ, is become filthy. And we find this statement also in verse 17. Zion stretches out her hands. Again, her. But there is none to comfort her. This is the 5th time that you find this, and the last time that you'll find it. The Lord has commanded against Jacob, and his neighbors should be his foes. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing. Isaiah said, my righteousness is as a filthy rag. The original text said, a menstrual pad, a menstrual cloth. God meant to get our attention. And we have smoothed it over now like it's John throwing away a dirty rag he just wiped his hand after changing the oil of a car. That doesn't shock you. But when a woman, and you find this also back in the book of Leviticus, any woman that was menstruating could not be a part of the fellowship or the community. Where did she go? Do what? She was put outside the camp. It also says that you were not allowed a sexual relation with your wife during that menstrual cycle. When it talks about her being filthy, it's simply talking about her being ceremonially unclean. It's not that there was something wrong with her, but ceremonially, the touching of blood, same as a dead person, made you ceremonially unclean. And so, we find that God talks about Jerusalem being his bride, being unfaithful, having an affair with the gods around her, which made Jerusalem filthy. And these people got the point. And so, remember, God has done nothing wrong. Look there at verse 18. It is nothing to you all who have passed by and look and see, if there is any sorrow like my sorrow, which was brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted. Who is doing all of this? And we went over this last week. Yes, God is. Look there at verse 12. It is the Lord who inflicts. Go down to 14. The Lord gave me into the hands of those whom I cannot withstand. 15. The Lord rejected. And he goes on through this and he tells us. It tells us that God killed these people without pity or without mercy. And man, that's not the God that we like preached or taught in any Bible class, is it? Well, there comes a time. And chapter 2 will start this way. Chapter 2, verse 1, talks about Jerusalem. She has been encompassed by a storm cloud. God's punishment, but also God's separation from them. You ever been driving and couldn't see beyond the hood of your car? You know, you're doing this number you can't see. And that's the idea there. God had abandoned, without pity, without mercy, the last two tribes. And he had handed them over to the enemy. And so let's understand the language in this particular chapter. Look there at verse 14. He said, my transgressions were bound into a yoke. The yoke there means servitude. God put these people under the rule of others. And then he goes on and he talks about, by his hand, verse 14, they were fastened together and they were set upon my neck. He caused my strength to fail. The Lord gave me into the hands of those whom I could not withstand. He's talking about here that their sins were woven together like a weapon, and God used those sins against his own people. And so he goes down in verse 17, he talks about the idea of, I have departed from them. I've given them up. And then in verse 19, or 19, he continues this thought. Well, at 18, if you would put 18 by 8, the Lord is in the right. Who was wrong? Who has sinned grievously? There were prophecies hundreds of years before. If you do this, here's what I'm going to do. And they had watched the destruction. Israel always knew. They didn't like it. They could not understand how God could put them into captivity. But he was the ones who brought the Assyrians, the Persians, the Babylonians. What they didn't see was that God used them to bring about a change. Why are we told to love our neighbors and love our enemies? Why are we commanded to do that? And rather, we need to work a lot harder on just loving one another. If we're always around the ones who, if I ask for something because I know that you can ask me, I can ask you, I'll have you over for supper because I know you'll have me over for supper. Yeah, you can borrow my car, I can borrow your car. Where is the change agent there? One of the dangerous things, and probably Mark knows this worse than anyone, you've got a nice shiny car and you get some imperfections on it, and they tell you to get sandpaper. That's scary, Mark. And you start with like a 100 and you end up with 1,000. And it's so smooth. And then you put the wax, the ceramic, whatever. Is it not the same with glasses? There is the abrasion, and that abrasion takes off the roughness. And this is what God's trying to do with his own people. That's what God tries to do with us, is to take off the rough edges. Do we have rough edges? Does everybody have rough edges? And I'm sure if you walked up to someone and asked them, they would tell you what their rough edges are. We all have them. And so you've got verse 8 as it compares to 18 there, that we're terrible sinners. And no matter what happens, God is right. All right, verse 19, he said, I called to my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and my elders perished in that day. You hear the language again? I called to my lovers. Who were the lovers of the tribes of Judah? Idols, the enemies, the ones who had given them false counsel. We dealt with this last week. The job of a shepherd is to keep themselves pure, the word pure, and the church pure. The idea of the priests and the prophet, the same. They were to keep God's word, God's vision, pure. Israel pure. In the light of these illicit lovers. And then he goes on, he says, my priests and my elders perished in that day while they sought food to receive their strength. Do elected officials If we had a recession here in northwest Arkansas and we couldn't find food, it was difficult for us to find food, I wonder if Washington, D.C. would have the same problem. No. Their standing in society protects them beyond us. And it was the same. And so you realize how desperate it is that even the priests and the prophets didn't have that protection. They were not taken care of. And so things were terrible. And then in verse 21, they heard my groaning yet. There is no one to comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that you have done it. They have brought the day you announced. And there you go back to Elsie. And now let them be as I am. And you can go back to Isaiah 2, you can go back to the book of Amos, and there are prophecies there about the problems that they would have. Now remember, Jeremiah and Lamentation took place in 2nd Chronicle. Look at the king's name, find the king, and you'll find them all back in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And so here is a people. They cry out for justice. Lord, we want you to bring our enemies into your justice, and you punish them like you're punishing us. And somehow they make it sound like that they would be satisfied when that happens. Then in verse 22, let all their evildoing come before you and deal with them as you have dealt with me. Because of all my transgressions, for my groans are many and my heart is faint. And so all as they're asking is they're saying, we want you to punish all those who now simply go by and they wag their head, they gnash their teeth, they hiss at us when they used to admire us. People would walk by and there you have Jerusalem, the city of 7 hills, and they admired it. There are certain cities that we dealt with last week that we go through and we admire. Maybe certain countries you go to that we admire. And now, people mock and they hiss. Now, chapter 2 begins like chapter 1. What's the first word in chapter 2, verse 1? What is it? How. Anyone have anything different? Alas, the cry. And so we looked at chapter 1 as being the suffering of Jerusalem. And I think in chapter 2, you see more how God feels about what they built for him in the temple. Who was it that decided that God needed somewhere to live? All right, what man? Who? David. Tell me the story real quick.
They built up the city. David had a fine palace, and everybody was living good, and there was no place for God.
All right, he had built him a cedar palace, and he looks out, there's nowhere for God. And it's almost like God is saying, if you got to do it, do it. But we also see some treatments of this temple that man had built for God, even though God says, I do not need a place made with man's hands. Brethren, we have built this building. When was the first, who can tell me when the first building, when you bought the property, was the little white building on it? And that was the first place that Farmington worshipped? And then we've got the two next door.
They had that one building, and then we built on to it, tore the other building down. We built this building, and then we built on to the one where we just tore the other one down, we built on to it. And then we put the two together, and then we built this.
Okay. Where was the original white building?
Well, we had a little annex behind it that we had Bible class in, but, it was basically right here.
Okay. Sometimes when you tear things down, people get hurt. The church in Providence Road in North Carolina, we're talking about, and I've told you this before, there always has to be change. We don't like change. I don't like change. Walmart's talking about redesigning their stores, and I think, well, that's the last time I go in it. You go in there and you find something, and they change the end caps, and it takes you half a day. Ask Donna, I hate shopping. And where it used to be, it's not there anymore. And I hate it when you've got all these sauces. You've even got vinegar, but you got to go 3 hours over to get soy sauce. It's a sauce. Put it in the sauce. No, it's got to be in the international part. And so there's always changes. What hurts is let's just say that next door, someone's mom and dad worked real hard to buy a blackboard. And brethren, some of you know what a dime means. And then the church just said, we're just going to throw these away. Does that hurt? Absolutely. And so it's how you make those changes that makes the difference. And so here, what you find is that this chapter starts and finishes with God's anger. We got churches so commercial now. God is nothing more than granddaddy who gives you everything you want. He's like Santa Claus. No matter what you do, you're always going to get a gift. What I love about the Bible is God turns the coin and tells you what's on the other side. Let me give you an example. Before you ever baptize someone, you ought to turn the coin. Is it great being a Christian? Yeah, I remember the very night or 1 o'clock in the morning when I was baptized. It's a great thing. I experience it more than you. We had a man come by and pray at Barn Creek. He was running for mayor again. I had no earthly idea he was a member of the Barn Creek Church of Christ. And he walked in and they asked him to pray, and I thought, who in the world is this man? I've been there 3.5 years and he'd never been to church. When it comes to funerals, what I hear was they were baptized. Brethren, the Bible doesn't talk about being baptized and going to heaven. It talks about what? Be thou faithful unto death, and you will receive a crown of life. It's about being faithful. And so Israel had stopped being faithful. And then we have the story of the prodigal son. We have the story of the lost sheep. And the only story we know is God runs after sheep. But for some reason, he doesn't run after prodigal sons. He waited, and he waited, and he waited. But brethren, some people, they just never come to themselves. They never go to the pig pen. And they die unfaithful or out of Christ. And so here we have this poem as it continues. And what we have here in the book of Lamentations is what would be sang at funerals. It would be sang on an annual basis, but it was a poem. And so he starts and he ends with the idea of anger. How the Lord in his anger has set the daughter of Zion under a cloud. We find this. God working with a wicked nation. The cloud, thunderstorm, the darkness that came upon the cross. God has separated himself from Israel, from Judah, and is represented in a cloud. They could no longer see heaven, and heaven chose not to see them. And so he talks about this, that he's cast them down under a cloud, and he has cast down from heaven to earth the splendor of Israel. Brethren, what is the splendor of Israel? What did God cast down or given up on? The relationship with his people. All right, we talked about, in chapter 1, we're talking about Jerusalem, the suffering of Jerusalem. And now you're talking about the suffering of the temple, God's dwelling place, where he agreed that he could be met there. Brethren, I am sure that if we would take all our kiddos and take them to any church, and after the amen, we said to them, all right, go play, where would they go? How many church houses would allow that? I guarantee you the preacher, the deacons, whoever is over children would chase them, put them in the back. We love it. And we've got to be careful that this building does not become the temple of God. It is holy in the fact that we are here and God dwells where? In us. Man, there were some enormous churches when I was in college in Nashville that are now empty. Some of them are torn down. And I remember when the Church of Christ at Hackleburg sold their old building to the Baptist. You would think God was going to strike them all dead. We may not be here one day, and this building may be sold to who knows what. They may tear it down and put a grocery store. I don't know. But what we've got to remember is God lives in us. And man, we've got to live lives that are worthy of that calling so that people can know. What's everyone looking at? Everyone's looking up. That reminds me of a story. Donna and I love to go to hot springs. And there, they have a wall and then it recesses some and then goes up. It's almost got like a roof. And birds have got in there and they sit up there on that roof and they poo down on the walls. And I looked at Donna and there was some sparrows in there when the preacher was preaching. And I said, just buy the teenagers a BB gun, for goodness sakes, and have at it. So that's what thought maybe some birds had got in here. All right, so the splendor of Israel. They still are fighting over the temple today. The Muslims own some of it. The Jews own some of it. And so that splendor there was that temple. And God said, I have cast it out. The splendor of Israel, and he has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. And so here we see what God valued, and he valued it so much, has now cast it away. And so if God has cast it away, why does mankind value it so much? Why the temple? Have you made your Mecca your return to Jerusalem? Like Jews have to, like the Muslims have to? Where's our temple? And don't misunderstand me. I do not believe that we ought to abuse this building in any form or fashion. But where is our temple, John? We are the temple of the Holy Spirit, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And so we ought to take care of ourselves. We're to make sure that we live in harmony with God, that there is no cloud. One man's talking about sin in our life clogs the pipes. God can hear any and every prayer that he desires. And we should not be telling us who he can and cannot listen to. But brethren, sin in our life, a wrong relationship in our life, anger with the brethren, it clogs the pipes up. Any thoughts? Are you enjoying the class? Don't be afraid to say no. My wife once told me, when we stopped at a church in Texas, you ever preach like that? I'm going to come up and tell you, if you can't do any better than that, I'm going to drag you down. You think she meant it? Absolutely. She don't need to come, just look at the eyes. All right, next week, read chapter 2, and I'll give out some questions, but I want you to read it, and man, all the way through here, there are points that just hit you. What about today? The lamenting here, I think, is a synonym for God, not so much Jeremiah, even though Jeremiah the prophet saw his people, the greatness of Jerusalem, the greatness of the temple, totally deteriorated and ransacked by hoodlums. And by the way, you can't... I put on Facebook, there were a bunch of hoodlums stealing stuff, and I said, a piece of lead would stop that, and I had to go back to prison. They put you in Facebook prison. And even when they let you out, they don't give you a certificate. But with me, for like 3 months, they banned me from saying anything. I got a lot to say with people that walk into a store, load up a bag, and steal it. And then some politicians saying, well, they need to feed their family. Yeah, right. All right. Next week, what are we going to be studying? Lamentations, chapter 2. Thank you for your attention. Hey, Wayne, what are they going to be doing for Rose next week? Putting cement into the left eye. Okay. And that will hold what? The retina? Okay. See if it's reattached itself. See if it's reattached itself.
She's only got part of the top of her eye. The rest of it is
Okay.